I'd like to ask Mac Jackson if he'll say a word of prayer. Representative Jackson.
In the name of Jesus, as we come before you, we ask for your guidance, your wisdom, as we do the business of the state of Georgia and for the people of Georgia. We know that you're well able, Lord, so we depend on you for your guidance now. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. The first thing we have on our agenda is Georgia Forestry Commission, Director Chuck Williams. Does everybody have a tracking sheet?
Madam Chair, good afternoon to you and your committee. It's a pleasure to be in front of you this afternoon. Thank you all for your time. Whose computer is this? Does it belong to the state or any of the agencies that are presenting? Can I fold it down and move it? If the cable is long enough. There we go. Madam Chair, thank you again. Chuck Williams, Director of the Georgia Forestry Commission. I have several staff members with me today that a couple of them were here for other meetings and are here with us this afternoon. I have Gary White, our Deputy Director, Michelle Gray, who is our Administrative Officer and Chief Financial Officer, and Penny Brown, who works with Michelle. And Michelle and Penny were in meetings over at Twin Towers this morning. We are managing travel, Madam Chair. I just want to make that clear as you look here.
Well, did you come in a minivan or a bus?
We did carpool. Only 2 state vehicles were involved in this travel run today, Madam Chair. So
thank you. Thank y'all for coming.
We came from different parts of the state. It's my understanding that we're to address today the amended FY20 budget, not the 21 budget, and we will do that, Madam Chair. And I'm going to focus a little on the dollars today and what's behind the dollars, since we gave a general agency overview a few days ago at joint budget hearings, but we will obviously answer any questions that you have. As far as our budget, the amended 20 budget, the governor's requested 4% cut to that budget for us equated to $1.554 million, or spread over the 9-month period starting in October when the budget reduction started being withheld, $173,000 a month over each month over that 9-month period. The governor's proposed budget, when it came out with the $1,000 pay adjustments proposed for employees making under $40,000, which we have a large number of in our agency, took that decrease from $1.554 million down to $1.517 million. And what I want to do is take a few minutes, Madam Chair, to really talk about how we propose in the amended budget to meet those reduction targets, or to seek to meet those. One thing that we're doing is what we refer to as staffing lapses, and that, as you may know, is when we have normal attrition and a position becomes vacant. From the time that we start the process of seeking to fill that position, advertising and whatnot, interviewing and actually getting someone on board, our experience has been that generally that is on average 6 to 8 weeks. So in our annual budget cycle, we pick up savings, if you will, from those positions being vacant for that 6 to 8 weeks. As a result of the budget instructions for FY20, we implemented a 2-month basically freeze in addition to that, and said that any position that comes open within our agency, the default position is going to be we're going to hold off for 2 months before starting the process to fill that position. That is subject to being waived by myself or the deputy director, so we look at each one of those situations individually, but again, the default is to hold off for 2 months before starting the process that would normally start immediately when a vacancy occurs. And just on our protection budget, I think we had proposed that that in personnel services, the governor's budget proposed that we needed to pick up $300,000 in savings there. We think that based on sort of a rolling average of 12 positions for 4 months out of the year, that's the normal plus the 2 months that we're adding in there at a $30,000 starting pay for rangers, we pick up somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000 there, if those numbers hold true. But that does not come without a cost from our service level as far as impacts to our agency, impacts to the state's taxpayers, and particularly the landowners that we serve. We think in the short term we can manage, particularly at the protection level, which are the folks that fight wildfires and help landowners with prescribed fire, rural fire departments with RFD equipment, whatnot. We can manage this in the short term. Longer term, we start getting into issues such as, we have rangers on call all the time at every one of our units. If you have a 3-ranger unit that now becomes a 2-ranger unit, that means that someone's on call pretty much all the time, and that becomes certainly an issue in and of itself. So, manageable short term, yes. Longer term, problematic. Same principle, Madam Chair, on foresters, the folks that provide management input and advice to landowners and other state agencies, except that our turnover there is not at the rate it is with rangers, so we can pick up some savings there, but certainly a much lesser number than it is on the protection side. And then on the administrative side, which Michelle Gray manages, we held an accountant position for 7 months before filling it to try to pick up the savings there that we felt like we needed to. Probably like most agencies, we immediately upon receiving the governor's budget instructions started looking even closer at what was already a very close look process for agency travel, both in-state and out-of-state. We have tried within recent weeks to start quantifying potential travel, particularly out-of-state, that either has not occurred or will not occur. We don't have definitive dollars at this point, Madam Chair, to apply to that, but certainly we're looking closer at that, and we can attempt to put some numbers on that at this point, but really it's a little bit difficult to do at this point, not knowing the specifics of some of that travel. Maintenance, both building maintenance and vehicle and equipment maintenance, as I mentioned in the joint budget hearings, from a minor and a moderate building repair standpoint, as we've said, if the roof is leaking on the building and it threatens the integrity of the building, we need to find a way to fix it. If the shutters or the fascia boards need painting, we probably don't need to paint those right now. But again, as Gary White pointed out, if we don't paint those shutters for 2 or 3 or 4 years, then the shutters start rotting and falling off the building. So again, a short-term response there. We've got some bond money for major repairs that we're able to do some of the major repairs and renovations. On the equipment side, certainly we will prioritize the dollars that we do have to work with there on safety-related repairs and maintenance that are needed, with initial focus on fire suppression equipment, both for the safety of our operators as well as the safety of the public, and then beyond that on the other vehicles in the fleet. But obviously we know that there's only so far we can go when you start talking about equipment repairs and safety and maintenance before it becomes penny wise and pound foolish. We talk a lot about cutting expenses, but for our agency that operates on a varied mix of funding, both state funding, some federal funding, which I'll touch on, as well as internally generated revenues, we don't want to lose sight of the revenue side of the ledger as well. One of our basic services that we provide for landowner public is plowing and burning for people that use the great management tool of prescribed fire. That is where our folks that have those dozers and that training to fight wildfire also go out and plow fire breaks and help landowners with prescribed fire. We average about $1.4 million in revenue from that program annually, again, highly weather dependent. If it's wet and not a good burning season, obviously we're not going to be doing as much plowing and burning, so we're at the mercy of Mother Nature there. As some of you know, we have a nursery operation that grows seedlings for sale to landowners for replanting, both hardwood and pine. We actually cooperate with the private sector there. We sell pine seed from our seed orchard to the private sector. I know some years ago there was concern about a state-operated entity, a nursery selling seedlings and competing with the private sector. We feel, and I think most of the private sector would agree, that there's much more of a cooperative relationship there if you will, than a competitive relationship, and we need each other. For this fiscal year, we're projecting over $1 million, actually around $1.2 million in seedling sales this year. There's been a high demand for seedlings, both as a result of damage from Hurricane Michael as well as seedling mortality from just general plantings that suffered through last year's drought. So the seedling supplies are getting tight statewide, and I think that's the reason that our seedling sales are robust. We sell surplus equipment, as you folks are kind enough to fund new equipment for us, particularly heavy truck transports to move fire suppression dozers, and the dozers themselves. We're able to put that equipment on the surplus market through the state system. We average usually around $300,000 to $400,000 a year in revenue from surplus equipment sales. Timber sales. Some of you may be aware that we have 2 state forests that we own and manage on behalf of the taxpayers of Georgia: the Dixon Memorial State Forest, primarily in Ware County, and the Bartram Forest in Baldwin County outside of Milledgeville. And those do have growing timber on them. We try to view that timber resource as a resource that first and foremost should be managed sustainably. From a silvicultural or forest management standpoint, we try not to view it, if you will, as a piggy bank, because we feel that if anyone in the state should be managing their forest sustainably, it should be the Georgia Forestry Commission. So that is really our mantra there. In our current budget, there's $1 million in timber sales from those state forests, and again, that is in the budget. You and the governor expect us to put a realistic number in every year, and that's where we are this year. Couple other ways we generate revenue, what we call instant management income, and that is primarily where if our sister states out to the west are experiencing wildfire problems and we're not, we're quick to volunteer to send our people, and our people are quick to volunteer to go on instant management teams to go help out, usually, again, western neighbors. For us, it's the classic win-win. It helps our folks get training and get exposed to other firefighting techniques that they would not otherwise, just if they were sequestered here in Georgia. And generally those expenses are picked up by the state we're sending them to, and or our federal partners. And when we've got folks, let's say in Texas, we're not paying them either for their base 8 every day or their overtime. So they basically come off of our payroll, if you will, and go on someone else's payroll, and we're getting training at the same time. Other revenue on a recurring basis, for a number of years, there's been a provision in state law that for counties that want fire protection services, that they will pay a fee to the Georgia Forestry Commission per forested acre. That fee some years ago was set at 10 cents per acre, and as it stands now, I think for last year we've collected that fee from 158 out of 159 of Georgia's counties, and that fee in and of itself generates about $2 million annually. And again, that is built into our core budget. Other revenue that is not recurring, I guess I would say thankfully, and particularly we're still feeling the impacts from Hurricane Michael. Obviously, southwest Georgia and south central Georgia landowners are still feeling that impact from a negative basis. For us, as strange as it sounds, that was somewhat of a financial positive impact for us, Madam Chair. And some of that was state dollars. It was monies that you appropriated during the special session after Hurricane Michael for us to help to allow us to help landowners deal with the devastation that they were dealing with there. For example, the state allocated $20 million for debris cleanup for forestry after Hurricane Michael. $1.4 million of that was suballocated to the Forestry Commission to use our personnel and our equipment to help landowners clear debris out of forest roads and fire breaks, and that was not altogether an altruistic motive. That was, we knew that with the amount of wood that was on the ground in southwest Georgia, that wildfire danger, as soon as that wood started drying out, was going to ratchet up, and we knew that those landowners and our agency were going to need access. So there was money that moved from that fund into our coffers to help us. We put in a lot of overtime, and we did damage to a lot of equipment, if you will, clearing up that devastation. So that was not a windfall for us, but it was a service we were glad to provide, but it did provide cash flow. And then the other part of that, Madam Chair, is the federal component, if you will. FEMA dollars that came to us through GEMA, some $700,000 related to Hurricane Michael. $400,000 of that went to overtime, if you will, for our people. A large portion went to just general operational expenses that were incurred responding to Hurricane Michael. And then we're just in the process now of receiving a U.S. Forest Service supplemental grant of around $3 million that is coming in. We will use a portion of that for equipment acquisition, fire engines, skid steer dozers, and again, repairs and maintenance on equipment that we've incurred. Forest health, we will use some of that to help deal with invasive species that always are a problem after an event like Hurricane Michael. We will use some of that for urban forestry. A lot of people sort of forget that cities and counties were impacted within their urban forest, if you will, just like commercial timberland. We feel a responsibility there. And then general labor for the ongoing efforts. We're still working a lot in southwest Georgia with those landowners to help them recover. So that, Madam Chair, is really sort of where we are. Again, our budget numbers are fairly benign, as I mentioned the other day. That is sort of in general how we propose to attempt to meet the FY20 amended budget cuts. And with that, Madam Chair, I will stand for questions.
Don't have any questions? Of course I do. All right, let me ask you. I noticed down on at 26.3.6, reduced funds in computer charges.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's 300-something thousand. What kind of was that new? Is that equipment or?
It is. It is actually equipment. It's hardware, not software. We were actually looking at a pretty significant upgrade of some computer equipment, and with a big focus on printers. We're running sort of an antiquated fleet of printers around the state, and that really is what's on the chopping block there.
Okay. Well, we put a lot of money in the past in your vehicles and everything.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think y'all got on a rotation basis about, y'all were sort of the star ones years ago that rotating about when you had automobiles and that. Is this going to put us out of the cycle by not purchasing these vehicles?
It has the potential. Generally speaking, we rely on bond funding to purchase the heavier vehicles, the transports and the dozers. I've
forgotten how many bulldozers we just bought. And another thing, what about the stipulation that was put on about how you bulldozers crank off? I don't know what you call it. The cut off when you get so hot. It's the new federal rule.
Yes, ma'am.
I can't remember what you call that.
Yeah, well, it's basically the new computer, all the computer systems that are on the modern equipment.
And you have to override it. But if you're on a place that is burning up, how are you going to have time to override it?
I can address that. On the big equipment question, we're obviously going to defer light vehicle replacement that comes out of annual funding as opposed to bond funding.
Okay.
Really, unless it's a result of an insurance settlement where a vehicle has been wrecked, whatnot, or it's a result of federal grant monies like in our forest health program. Sometimes we're able to buy a new pickup truck for our forest health division without any state dollars being expended. So we will continue that. The issue you're referring to is an issue that has come up recently in about 90 of our newer Caterpillar fire suppression dozers, where those dozers were built without if you will, the overrides that are normally built into construction grade dozers, where if the computer senses a problem, it either shuts that dozer down or sends it into an idle mode, if you will, to avoid further damage. And as we've said, if you're grading dirt on a shopping center site and the dozer goes into that mode, it's one thing. If you're on the downwind end of a strong forest fire, something else. Thankfully, Commissioner Alex Atwood at DOAS facilitated about a month ago a meeting between our agency, Yancey Caterpillar dealership and Caterpillar corporate, and a very robust discussion about those 90 dozers and the concerns we have, and we feel confident that Caterpillar is working basically on some computer programming now that will allow us to build in some safeguards there to that equipment that doesn't exist for pretty much most all of that 90 dozer fleet. And going ahead, we will seek, as we purchase new equipment, to try to have those overrides built into the equipment at the factory.
Good, well, thank you. And one other final question, you know what my pet project is? It's
Yes,
about
ma'am.
Does this affect that?
She's referring, for those of you that don't know, to our rural fire defense program, our firefighter property program, where we take surplus equipment from our fleet and repurpose it to help rural fire departments, or we screen federal surplus equipment. And it's amazing what the feds sometimes give away. Equipment that's still got a ton of serviceable life in it, and we work with fire departments. Had a situation, Madam Chair, just last week. Representative Gerald Green called and said that Clay County and his district was in a pickle. They basically had lost their only fire truck in one half of the county, had suffered some total losses of buildings as a result, and we immediately started working with them to try to get them something in place. Not a long-term fix, but something in place right now while we work on a long-term fix. And I learned just today that we were able, within a few days, to get them back in the firefighting business, if you will. So that program continues, and we will
Good.
strive to continue that program.
Well, I think the last time I heard a report on it, I think it's been in effect about, is it 8 years? 8 years, and we'd gotten $72 million back to local fire departments.
As I said, it's amazing. It's amazing what the federal government decides
away.
that the taxpayers
And-
don't
and-
need anymore.
Yeah, and we're welcome to take their
We'll take it.
leftovers anytime.
We'll take it.
Thank you, and thank you for the job you're doing. Any other questions? Okay, Representative Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, thank you for being here. Always good to see you.
Thank you.
One quick question, that's a long question. We're gonna go back up to Michael. We had millions of trees on the ground. I know you guys just did yeoman's work, working to get that cleaned up. We were really concerned about if we went into a period of drought, that we could burn half the state down just with the millions of trees that were on the ground. Can you tell me where we're at with that right now? Have we mitigated that risk? Are these cuts that we're talking about this year, are they gonna have a significant impact if those risks still exist?
I think in the short term, between the work we and other agencies and entities have done, and Mother Nature with some wet weather since Hurricane Michael, we're not overly concerned right now with the threat level. There was a good amount of wood that was salvaged, if you will, that left the forest floor and went to the mills. Unfortunately, there was a lot of wood that was not salvaged, and it is still there. But with the wet weather we've had, in some cases, rot is taking place and reducing the fire danger. But, as we know in Georgia, we're always just a few weeks away from a drought, regardless of what time of year it is. So there's still a lot of fuel on the forest floor. With the right combination of dry weather and whatnot, we could have a problem. Again, talking about the amended budget, we feel like that we're in decent shape, if you will, to deal with what is more than likely facing us between now and the end of June, the end of this fiscal year. But again, I think the bigger issue is if we start getting into personnel actions, and that very well may be, Madam Chair, something that we discuss in more detail if we have an opportunity to come before you for fiscal year 21, and we start reducing manpower.
You will have an opportunity to come.
Through whatever means, we're not overly staffed now. So if you start cutting staff any in that protection division, we can only manage through that so long before our service level drops off. It's just inevitable. If we're not overstaffed now, and then you cut where we're at now, that means that something's got to give. And I think at that point, that's when the risk could start ratcheting up. We will obviously, as good state citizens, we will obviously manage that as best we can, but we're not magicians. And at some point, we will we won't have that magic wand.
How bad is from the standpoint of the cleanup? Are we in pretty good shape there? Are we where we should be? Are we behind?
I
How
think,
would you describe it?
yeah, I think the challenge is there's really no metric to go by, if you will, on what should get cleaned up in situations like this. Most of the commercial pine timber land, a lot of it has been cleaned up, and we don't have quantifiable numbers because, again, we focused on helping those landowners clean up that needed our help rather than being out there counting sticks and acres and whatnot. Hardwoods are a different story. The hardwood bottoms that were destroyed by Hurricane Michael, for the most part, are not salvageable. They're just still laying there mangled, and nobody really knows, how Mother Nature is going to regenerate those. I was down at the Jones Ecological Center in Baker County a few weeks ago, and actually their researchers, they are using Hurricane Michael as an opportunity to research how the forest responded. And why did some forests somewhat withstand Hurricane Michael winds, and the forest across the road was devastated? So this will be a learning experience, and in some cases, Mother Nature works slowly, and it may be years before we really realize sort of what the implications were and what certain management actions resulted in, didn't result in. It'll take a while.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, and thank you for the job you're doing, because I know that y'all's budget has always been lean, and y'all have never had any fat in it, and I'm sure it's hard to cut some out.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
Committee.
Next, we'll have Public Service Commission.
Good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
Madam Chairman, Chairwoman, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Chuck Eaton, the Chairman of the Georgia Public Service Commission, and I'm pleased to be here with my colleague, Commissioner Jason Shaw, today. Tom Kraus, our PIO, Tom Bond, our Head of Utilities, and Terry Pritchard, our CFO. I'm prepared to speak about 20 and 21, but I can speak only about whatever you'd like.
Well, the representative, they asked us only to do 21.
That's
I
fine.
mean, 20. Only do 20, and so if we just limit that to 20.
Happy to do that.
Okay.
Okay, so to truly understand the Public Service Commission and realize what we are, we're essentially an economic development agency. And so when industry relocates to Georgia, competitive and reliable utilities are extremely high on their list. And it's not just industry relocating here, it's industry deciding which plants to put projects in and which plants to shut down. They may have an operation in Alabama, they may have an operation in California, they may have an operation in Georgia, and there's constant competition within that corporation, and we hear about it all the time. And we've been very thoughtful with our regulation here in Georgia. We've encouraged diversity, nuclear, coal, natural gas, solar, wind, all of it. We've encouraged to be safe and reliable, and that's not true in all of the states. I mean, for instance, in California, overregulation, mandates, and pushing initiatives past the constraints of the free market have caused rolling blackouts and high prices. One of the key things to keep in mind, I mean, within 2 years, Georgia's largest economic development project in history, one of the largest capital projects in the entire country right now, Vogtle 3 and 4, will be coming online. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us clean and reliable energy, and will be the envy of the entire South and really the United States, that we will have this locked down for 50, 60 years. We should be hiring people right now. We're going to, in a few years, we're going to be holding hearings on the final tab on this project, and we should be hiring in training people right now. And I think one of the misconceptions about what the commission does is, and I mentioned this in the previous hearing, is that we're essentially a judicial body. Our decisions are appealable. And so when somebody comes in, generally a utility, whether they're asking for recovery on a nuclear project or higher rates, they're doing a litigation position. And so they have, the utility itself has huge staffs. They have one of the top law firms in Atlanta with many, many lawyers that are researching and presenting their case. And so they're presenting a case here. And in our staff and the few attorneys that we've retained, actually our top attorney is retiring in a few days. Their job is to present their position and really almost go on an Easter egg hunt and go through their litigation position and present facts and evidence, criticizing it and bringing it down to a more reasonable area. If we don't have the staff and the expertise to do that, they will just get a higher position because it's an appealable case. And so if we don't present those facts and evidence contrary to it, if we don't have the expertise, if we don't have the attorneys, and we just arbitrarily give them this number, they will have an appealable decision at Fulton County Superior Court. And so that's a key difference and something you need to understand. We just finished, the last year was a very busy year for us. We just finished a Georgia Power rate case and an Atlanta Gaslight rate case and two capital cases as well, the Georgia Power IRP and the Atlanta Gas Supply Plan. And what that means is these cases have charges now. And the staff is charged with implementing a lot of what we passed last year. And again, we need that expertise to be able to implement that properly for the citizens of Georgia. And so getting now to our fiscal year 2020 budget, it includes a little bit over $10 million in state funds. So I will admit I'm subjective, but I would argue we're obviously have the smallest budget of any constitutional agency. And I would argue that we have one of the biggest impacts, if not the biggest impact, on everyday Georgians for that $10 million. And so to meet the governor's initial goal of a 4% cut, we would need to remove about $402,000 from this year's budget. But the new budget, the proposed budget increase had us cutting 4.8%. And we are down, so that's an additional $82,000, which is a lot when we're talking about staff. We're very labor intensive. I know you hear it from many agencies, but we are literally down to the bone at this point. The 8% cut, for instance, I'm not a beneficiary of it, but three of our commissioners that are required by state law to live in districts, their per diems were cut, for instance, out of that 8%. And these are commissioners. Some of them, like Commissioner Shaw, drives 3.5 hours to come up here. He's required to live by state law in South Georgia. And, so these are the types of cuts that we're dealing with. But to take action on this and to meet this, we're maximizing federal funds of $70,000. We've suspended our dues to our national association in training partners for $60,000. And this isn't, this organization provides extremely valuable research to the commission. They're researching, as many of you know, renewable energies are very popular today, solar power. There's all kinds of questions about how you introduce that into the marketplace, how you pay for it, how do you implement it without having the ratepayer subsidizing. This is the type of research that's coming out of our national organization. We will no longer have access to that research. We've reduced, we've all but eliminated our travel. We've reduced that by $77,000. We've done an administrative cost restructuring of $40,000. 2 employees have left the PSC. We won't be rehiring them. Of course, we're up against it a little bit because we're already majority through 2020, so that will result in a $60,000 savings. So the remaining shortfall of $176,000, our only ability to meet that, because it's all labor, is through furloughs. During the Great Recession, the PSC reduced our employees from 106 to 80 positions. Currently, we only have 83 positions. So we're very close to where we were during the Great recession were virtually the same. It's not as if we've gotten bloated over the years. As I mentioned, our employees ensure that we have competitive energy cost, and our pipeline inspectors are still able to get out there and keep the pipeline safe. Last year, the PSC returned about $550,000 of the general fund from fines assessed for the Call Before You Dig program. That has dropped substantially this year because we have had to move a couple of those Call Before You Dig inspectors over into the pipeline safety department, which is majority paid for by federal funds. And so we don't have the employees that were doing that before. And if we could hire even 2 more inspectors there, that would return $150,000 easily to the state legislature. So we are, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but we are implementing 5 furlough days now. The memo's already gone out to our employees. Obviously, it would be good news to them if we can get this adjusted and not have to do furlough days. It's not the best thing for morale, but it is what it is. I mean, I think our budget is very transparent. So respectfully, I ask that you consider our budget, how small it is relative to other government agencies and constitutional offices. Consider the direct impact that we have on Georgians. And we ask that the General Assembly not cut our budget at the increased 4.8% level, and please to reduce the percentage cuts below the 4% cut. It would still require a few furlough days, but obviously anything that could be restored would be less furlough days. And with that, I'm available for any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It seems as though furloughs in this economy would be fairly challenging. I mean, if all we hear, or at least a lot of what we hear, is how competitive the marketplace is and how hard it is to even hire personnel. So I'm just trying to gauge, or at least get your gauge of what the impact would be if those furlough days were implemented on retention of personnel.
Well, it could potentially be a huge problem. I mean, especially to be frank about it. I mean, it was changed years ago, but we no longer have the golden handcuffs of the pension, the state pension, and so especially the employees. We have many promising employees that have less seniority that aren't tied down by that. One of the advantages, of course, to a 401k style program is it's more responsible and you don't get any of these issues, but the disadvantage is they can leave quite easily. And it's a concern. It's a concern from a recruitment standpoint. I mean, we're losing an attorney that goes toe-to-toe with the top law firms in Atlanta that has a wealth of institutional knowledge. We're losing him in a few days. We've got some very promising young attorneys, but you always wonder in the back of the mind that they could walk into my office any day and say, I've accepted a job at a private law firm.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for the work that you all do, and definitely we miss our comrade over there, but we salute you.
Well, we're happy to have him now. So we can't have him back. So.
And good evening to my good friend Tim Eccles. Tell him we said hello. I saw you had a line item that you returned about $550,000 in the general fund last year, and you were looking at about $484,000 that you might need to reduce. Is there any way, since you had to look at that fund being called be called before you dig fund, can we call them and dig it back up and get it back to you?
That sounds like a great idea to me. As I mentioned before, I actually had my numbers wrong. I looked it up, but I said for 2 investigators, we could return 150,000. What I meant to say was for 2 more investigators, 450,000, we could return $300,000 to the state. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, it's hard because the federal side of it has such stringent regulations that you can't just throw somebody right into pipeline safety like that. So it's natural for us to transition the call before you dig folks into that, maximize those federal funds, and it's left us with short positions and facing furlough days, no way to fill them.
I just think it's a detriment that the service that you all do to not have what you need. We see several departments, we dealt with it from the agriculture department, et cetera, and to have, you have employees that need, and then you all serve. Just with good hopes that we can find some way to supplement it.
I appreciate that, Representative.
Any other questions? I've got one quick question. We put some money in, I guess it was in the 2020 budget to sort of help retention for the lawyers and everything. Did this keep the other lawyers on? Or you said we had one retiring.
Well, it kept him on for 2 very valuable years. He was wanting to retire 2 years ago, and as I mentioned earlier, we had an extremely busy schedule last year, and it was vital to keep him on. And he's been training the younger attorneys, and we were able to give some of the other attorneys a bump, but and that was helpful. But of course, that position now that he's retiring is a vacant position, and at least during the for the 2020 budget, we're not able to fill it until hopefully we can look beyond that, the 2021 budget.
Well, I noticed in your budget, I think you took a 4.8% cut.
We did.
Was there any reason you took a 4.8 instead of a 4?
It's hard for me to get into their heads for recommending the 4.8.
This wasn't your budget. This isn't what you recommended.
No, we followed what the proposed idea was at 4, and then we were hit with a 4.8. Now, some of that 0.8% I mentioned earlier was elimination of per diems. There's some other areas that are dues, but we had already recommended eliminating our NARUC and NRI dues in our 4% budget. So there's a bit of a discrepancy there, but it is what it is at this point. We've got a 4.8 bogey to hit, and the only way we can do that is with 5 furlough days.
Well, does the state law require to pay per diem?
Again, I'm not an expert on it because I live in the city of Atlanta. I do think it's the right thing to do.
I know it's the right thing to do. Pretty soon you won't get anybody to run.
Well, I agree with you. Certainly not of the quality of my colleague over there, but I think there's some. I've heard cases made on that.
Yeah.
But I think we can all recognize it's the right thing to do. That's for sure.
I know too. Per diem, staying in Atlanta is a lot more expensive than staying in Valdosta, Georgia.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate Representative Powell serving.
Yeah.
Representative Shaw. Thank you. I've just known you all your life. I got your name wrong. I had Representative Powell on my mind today.
That's me.
Okay.
Refresh my memory now. The attorney that was leaving, he was at the age, or she was at the age we knew he or she was leaving. And the problem we had was the gap with training. So we went ahead and funded another attorney. Really, we funded an attorney because we knew we were going to be training this attorney. At that point, we had an extra attorney. That's correct. But wait just a minute. Let me ask you, it could still happen at any time. I mean, an attorney could still leave. They don't have to be 60 or 65 or 58 to be ready to retire. But that's actually what we did, if my memory is correct. We knew we had a problem. We had a gap there with 2 years of training, and we funded an attorney for a training spot. So we're back to where we were before we did that.
Well, respectfully, though, the attorney that's retiring
Sure.
was making a much higher
Sure.
salary
Much
and
more
has
experience, yes.
much more experience
Sure, no doubt about
than the younger one
it. Sure.
that we did hire. And as I mentioned before, my fear is at any moment.
Sure. There's, attrition, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and thank you for the job you're doing.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Jifa. Okay. Y'all will find this under Department of Agriculture. What is it?
Community affairs.
Community Affairs, excuse me, I'm sorry. All right. Community Affairs. No. Okay. Well, this should be short. You have only one cut.
Right, I mean, it's to
And-
3 pass-through agencies, and the total reduction, after hearing these folks, I'm embarrassed to even be up here, but is $33,000 for
Yeah.
the 3 entities
16, 14,
16, 14.
under
One.
DCA.
Well, does this have anything to do with you drawing down federal funds? That's what we wanted to know.
No, ma'am.
It
These
has-
are all pass-through dollars, so the dollars go to Georgia Rural Water, gets a chunk of it. The Metro North Georgia Water Planning District gets a chunk of it. And then the 11 RC&Ds that we had talked about get some money as well. So those 3 entities would experience the cut in various degrees.
Okay. All right, I appreciate you coming up just to say that.
It's always a pleasure to be here, and I wanted to clear out the room for you, but, you know.
Somebody asked a question.
And someone asked him a question. I'm already
No, it's okay, you don't have to.
ask you a question. Oh, I knew we'd get one from.
I was almost out.
About my favorite subject. You're talking about my favorite subject, water. So you got 3 agencies that are being cut here. Can you tell me about the cuts on what are the 3 agencies? What are their cuts?
Well, they do a variety of things, each one. So Georgia Rural Water, when we enter a contract with them, they provide a whole host of services ranging from lagoon inspections, smoke tests, business plans. I mean, you're familiar with all that they do, and they guarantee us, for the money they get, a minimum number of those services. So our understanding is that they would be able to hit the minimum, but they won't be able to do any more than that.
So what are the 3 agencies?
The Georgia Rural Water Association,
Okay,
the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District,
yeah.
and then there's 11 resource conservation and development districts. And so each one of those 11 was appropriated $20,000.
So
Is it an even split between the 3, or did you take?
It's 4% out of each one, but each one is a different amount. Georgia Rural Water had 400 plus, and then each RC&D is $800.
okay.
Right.
Georgia Water, the Planning Commission took like $100,000 hit last year out of their budget. I remember that from last year. So.
For the Metro North Georgia Water Planning
Yeah.
District, right? And then they are associated with ARC, but they are separate.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're gonna hear from Georgia Historical Society. We're not, okay, thank you. I thought they were, they really didn't have any cuts, Georgia Historical, in this budget. It was a complete pass-through, so, we're not gonna hear from them. Thank y'all, and thank y'all for coming, and we will take up the 2021 budget after we get this one approved. Thank you.